This is the Royal York and is Toronto's 28-story castle in the city. Join me for 2 nights inside of one of Canada's final Grand Railway hotels, where I'll take you on a trip through time into the stories of how the Royal York shaped downtown Toronto, inside the world's largest observation tower, and why this is a must-experience piece of Canadian history. But to begin that story, let's rewind back in time. 1885 saw the completion of Canada's first coast-to-coast railway by the Canadian Pacific. But the 20th century would usher in a new era of competition from the Grand Trunk Pacific to complete their Atlantic to Pacific route, and a battle for passenger rail service and Grand Railway Hotel supremacy in Canada. The Grand Railway Hotels have held a legacy of luxury and earned the nicknames castles in the city for a reason, and the Royal York would soon be the largest and the grandest of them all. 1913 saw the Grand Trunk Pacific build a railway across the north, brought together by its Grand Railway Hotels that did not spare a penny in the name of luxury. Now, Grand Trunk was set to build Canada's largest and grandest passenger station to date here in Toronto, but were struggling to financially recover from the loss of their visionary Charles Melville Hayes after he perished in April of 1912 on the Titanic. And there'll be a lot more dedicated to him in my upcoming episode at the Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton. But the Canadian Pacific, on the other hand, were the only financially stable railway in Canada at the time. So in a joint effort, Grand Trunk Pacific and Canadian Pacific would break ground in 1914 on today's Toronto Union Station. Now, Grand Trunk Pacific and Canadian Pacific rarely agreed on much, and since everything was 50-50, barely any progress was made until 1920, when Grand Trunk Pacific officially went bankrupt, and the Canadian Pacific would then leverage their financial stranglehold to complete the station in 1927. And following that completion, the Canadian Pacific now saw an opportunity for a Grand Railway Hotel in the city that they hadn't conquered yet. The Canadian Pacific would purchase the Queen's Hotel across the street from Toronto Union Station, knock it down, and then begin construction to erect Toronto's newest castle. Construction took 2 years to complete and would open on June 11th of 1929 at a cost of $16 million. And the Royal York epitomized luxury with its chateau-esque architecture and Indiana limestone facade, boasting 1,300 rooms and the largest kitchen in Canada at that time. It catered to the elite traveler with unparalleled elegance and service, towering 28 floors high and housing enough red carpet to stretch all the way from the hotel's front doors into Hamilton. And this was the tallest building ever built in Canada at that time. And that large kitchen I mentioned earlier, they were producing 15,000 French rolls a day upon opening. And like most of the other Grand Railway hotels, the Royal York had an underground tunnel built to connect it to Union Station for the wealthiest of passengers not interested in walking across the street during the icy grips of winter. Now, the Royal York opened on the edge of the Roaring Twenties, where a room started at a pricey $4 a night. And although the crash of 1929 was only months away, there was no signs of the Great Depression ahead. But by 1957, the Canadian Pacific had decided that an expansion was necessary to meet the demand, and construction on the East Wing was completed in 1959, 2 years later, now totaling 1,600 guest rooms, making the Royal York once again the biggest hotel in Canada. Now, at the turn of the 21st century, the year 2000 would see Canadian Pacific Hotels merge with Fairmont Hotels and rename the Royal York into the Fairmont Royal York, and this sets the stage for my experience here in 2024 at Toronto's castle on the edge of Lake Ontario. Now, last week's focus was on the Fort Garry Hotel in Winnipeg, and I would have loved absolutely nothing more than to commute from my birthplace in Winnipeg, the gateway to the west, back into Toronto by train, the same way the passengers would have 95 summers ago for the opening of the Royal York. But let's be honest, Via Rail isn't cheap, especially in summer, so instead, I flew directly into Toronto Pearson. I took the express train into the Union Station instead, and although I've been here quite a few times over the years, the elegance never gets old, because this is Canada's busiest train station, and on the doorstep of this station, across the street, lies Toronto's Palace. And spoiler alert, the Royal York is absolutely stunning. From my first step inside the building, where I was greeted by the grand lobby adorned with hand-painted murals depicting Canada's heritage, to the tribute to the Grand Railway Hotels at the check-in desk, which includes the Empress in Victoria, the Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City, the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, as well as the Royal York, and the Banff Springs, which was actually the focus in episode 1 of the series, if you missed any of the previous episodes. And after check-in, awaiting me on the 11th floor was my fixed address for the next 2 nights. Whoa. All right. That's kind of cool. I kind of like it. Now, unlike the other episodes in this series, I'm traveling by myself this week. And the first thing that I like to do is get to the gym, especially after sitting on a plane for way too long. But when I got back from the gym, the pastry team of the Royal York had a really cool surprise for me. Whoa. It's a pretty sweet surprise. These chocolate-covered strawberries were seriously fresh, and the different textures of chocolate were absolutely outstanding. But these are the little things that Fairmont does to make your stay even more special, since my birthday was just a few days earlier, and what better way to enjoy your chocolate-dipped strawberries than looking out the window of Toronto's Grand Railway Hotel and still experience the same thing that guests got 95 years ago on opening day and watch the countless passenger trains leaving Toronto. And although yes, today's passenger rail travel experience in Canada resembles almost nothing of what it did even 40 years ago, one of my goals for this series is to share the experience and the stories of the Grand Railway hotels before they're forgotten forever. Canadian Pacific and Canadian National trains both operated out of Toronto Union Station, but when Canadian Pacific launched the Canadian in 1955, it was very quickly seen as a superior way to travel Canada by rail, departing here in Toronto Union Station, following the shores of the Great Lakes into Thunder Bay, over the prairies into Winnipeg, west into Calgary, and arriving on the Pacific Coast in Vancouver. And when you arrived on a passenger train east, the Royal York was the first sight of Toronto in the distance and the last when you went west. But fast forward to today, where the Royal York, despite its size, is absolutely buried by the countless glass-box skyscrapers and essentially invisible unless you're looking for it, which, if we're being honest, echoes a very similar essence to taking the train across Canada today. Unless you're seeking it out, you wouldn't know it's there. And although the Canadian still exists today, it no longer services Thunder Bay, Regina, Calgary, Banff, or Revelstoke, because in 1978, the Canadian Pacific and Canadian National handed off all their passenger service to a new government formed Via Rail Canada, and fast forward to 1990, they would cut southern service forever. Today, the Canadian takes the northern route into Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Edmonton, Jasper, and finally arriving west into Vancouver. And although Canada's passenger rail network is a skeleton of what it was even in 1955, I'm honestly thankful that we have anything at all, but I'm hopeful for a renaissance coming soon. Now, I'd finished up the last of my strawberries, and I headed downstairs before I got distracted by this really cool memorial on the second floor mezzanine honoring the hotel's 95th anniversary, which I thought was really cool. But I was even more eager to get a grip for the Royal York's culinary delights. Now, they have a few restaurants, but I was told by the staff that the library bar was their best, and although this place is absolutely beautiful, again, I was traveling by myself, so I took everything back up to my room, and it did not disappoint. The spicy chicken bites were outstanding. Smash burger was cooked great and composed really well with their house sauce and brioche bun. And what else can I say about the french fries? Salty, crispy, they were solid. And I was actually really excited to see if the Royal York could bat 2 for 2. So the next day I got the prime rib dip, and no joke, I think this was the greatest sandwich I've ever had in my life. The caramelized onions, the prime rib, the ciabatta were incredibly well married. The house salad on the other hand was okay. I mean, it's a house salad and the chicken was a little bit dry. But overall, the library bar experience is a testament to the hotel's dedication to their culinary experience. Now, how's the coffee? Well, not bad. The Banff Springs Hotel still takes a taco for my favorite drip coffee in the series so far, but I had a sit-down coffee the next night at the Rain Bar, and these shortbread cookies that they give you on the side to dip in your coffee are exceptional. But the real star of the show here is the rooftop honey in my coffee. The Royal York has a rooftop garden on top of the 1959 edition where they grow fresh herbs, produce, as well as beehives where they make their own honey, which takes the whole concept of farm to table to new heights here, 20 stories above Front Street, which, by the way, I'm absolutely terrified of heights. And 28 stories up lies one of the best views in the city of the CN Tower and Rogers Centre, which I'll touch more on in a second, as well as the Royal York's neon sign, as well as right here where snipers set up anytime our fearless leader Justin Trudeau stays here at the Royal York. All in all, this was a pretty cool first day, and after that, I headed back to my room for bed. The next morning, I got up early to witness the Canadian depart Toronto and west towards my home in Vancouver. But you probably recognize that large tower that it passes on the way out, and it's incredibly important. The dawn of the 1960s saw passenger rail travel on life support, and in one last attempt to try and revive it, Canadian National would scrap their downtown station in Edmonton to build their CN Tower in 1966. The Canadian Pacific would then scrap their downtown station in Calgary to build the Calgary Tower in 1968. And shortly after that, CN would scrap their train yards here in Toronto to make way for a tower that would serve as a landmark to symbolize their dominance in passenger rail service and construct the tallest structure in the world. The CN Tower construction began in February of 1973 and would open in June of 1976, taking the title as the tallest freestanding structure in the world at 550 meters high. That's almost 2,000 feet. Now, Canadian National would also sell out the remaining yards for the Skydome, which was built in 1989, home of the Toronto Blue Jays, and today known as Rogers Centre. But the CN Tower is an absolute must-do attraction, so I headed down and got in line for my chance to experience a piece of Toronto history. Inside, I'm going to go pick up my tickets at the guest services desk. They also take your picture, which I found really cool, and then I headed up. Now, the CN Tower is again the tallest observation tower in the entire Western Hemisphere in 2024, and has retained that title for over half a century. From my fixed address for tonight and Toronto's Grand Railway Hotel at the Royal York, to Union Station, to the home of the Toronto Maple Leafs and Raptors at Scotiabank Arena, to the old Canadian Pacific Roundhouse that is now a railway museum, and even Rogers Centre, which interestingly enough, later on that day, I went to go see the Blue Jays play the Astros, and the lounge seating has all food included, so I tried literally one of everything, from burgers to poutine, everything in between, and even a tuna poke bowl.
I have never in my life seen tuna at a baseball game.
Now, today was an absolute scorcher, and if there is one downside to this trip, it was the heat. I mean, it was plus 30 and humid all week. But the only thing that made that bearable was today's video sponsor, Sheath Underwear. Sheath Underwear is the only option when it comes to staying comfortable for me. Their bamboo mesh will help your body breathe, stay cool, and aerated. Their dual pouch technology is game-changing for any man out there that know all about what it means to have something stick to the side of your leg or getting sweaty and nasty down there, but Sheath fixes all that. American-made and founded by a member of the US military, Sheath is the only underwear I use and have worn for every episode in this series to date. I do a lot of traveling, by the way. And when you go to the link in the video description and use the promo code TRAV, that's my name, TRAV, you get 20% off the best underwear money can and ever will buy. And thank you so much to Sheath for sponsoring this video. And when I got back to the Royal York later that night, they were actually nice enough to switch me into a west-facing room so I could experience a few different views during my stay. And the following morning, I would check out, head out through Union Station, back to Toronto Pearson, and back home to Vancouver. Now, the Royal York is absolutely one of the most iconic Grand Railway hotels up there at the Banff Springs, Chateau Lake Louise, Hotel Vancouver, you name it. And like the Fort Garry and Winnipeg in last week's episode, the Royal York and the Fort Garry are the only two Grand Railway hotels located across the street from an active passenger rail station, which makes them incredibly conveniently located, preserving its legacy as a Grand Railway hotel amidst the forever-changing urban landscapes. Whether it's the culinary options, which were great, the accommodations, or the impeccable service, and you know I loved every second of seeing the trains depart out of my room window, and although, like the Banff Springs, the Royal York is fairly pricey, this is not just a stay, but a journey through Canadian history that every true Canadian should experience. I'm curious, do you have a story about the Royal York? Have you worked here? Whatever it is, leave a comment down below because I'd love to hear it. But there's still a few experiences left to go in this series, including next week in Saskatoon at the Bessborough Hotel, the final Grand Railway hotel built in Western Canada and a staple in the prairies. So hit the subscribe button so you don't miss that video. This series is my love letter to Canada. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.